How old were you when you had your very first job as a Gen X little girl, where you got paid for it? And what was it? We're going to take a little walk down memory lane right now today. My name is Amy Palmer. I am your Gen X Big Sister. This morning, I'm just getting back from the regional farmers market. It's behind me there. I have not been to this farmers market in many, many decades, like probably 4 decades at least since I've been here. And in coming here, I had to go through some neighborhoods where I grew up and where my first homes when I was a little girl, teenager growing up. So it got me sort of reminiscing about days gone by. And I started to think about a conversation that we started to have on Threads recently. Well, it's been a few, it's been a few months now. This was back in December that I was having this conversation on Threads, where I just put out a question of how old were you when you had your first job and what was it? And I was blown away by the responses. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people responded and shared, and their experience was very similar to mine and very likely yours. So for me, I started at 10 years old. I started babysitting my little brothers. I have 3 younger brothers. The youngest of them is 11 years younger than me. And then the second youngest, I think, is like 8 or 9 years younger. And so I started watching them when they were babies. And I was basically a baby, but I was 10 years old, given that responsibility. Now, not for long periods of time. If my parents were going to be gone, like for a very extended period of time, they would bring in a babysitter. But for shorter periods of time, I was it. And even though I was really young. And then what happened after that? Well, I used to do things for weekly allowance. Do you guys remember allowance? That we would have like a list of chores and things that we were expected to do in order to earn X amount of money. And we did that. And the allowance was not very much. I think it was like maybe $5. It was small amounts of money and list of expectations of what we needed to do to earn that. I'm curious, is that even still a thing? Like, I don't recall, like when my niece and my nephews were younger, I don't remember them ever mentioning allowance or chores or things like that. And, I don't have any children, so I don't know what it's like now, but is that still a thing? Do people still do that? Did Gen Z have to earn an allowance when they were little? And I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing that we had that sort of system set up already and we were kind of conditioned, sort of that capitalistic hustle grind thing was, conditioned into us at a young age? That sounds like a bad thing, but there's a piece of it though that feels like a good thing. Responsibility, being, knowing that you need to contribute and pitch in, etc. Anyway, did that when I was little. But then when I was 11, I decided I needed more of my own spending money. And I was kind of tired of depending on my parents for that money. So I was 11 years old and I called up the local newspaper, as many of you have done. I found out that this is a very familiar story amongst Gen X. I called up the newspaper and signed up to take on a paper route. And so one day, this 40-year-old man showed up at our door asking my mother to speak to Amy Palmer. I had not told my mother or my father that I was doing this, so they were a little taken aback. But to their credit, they ultimately let me proceed with doing the paper route, even though it was actually 2 paper routes put together. It ended up being like 150 homes altogether or something like that. And so I recruited my little brother to help me. My father would help me on Sundays because you might recall the Sunday newspapers were really big and really heavy. So it required, some extra planning and organizing. And, I had to go around and collect payment for the newspapers. Do you remember this? We would have to go around door to door of all of these people's houses. Here I was, an 11-year-old girl doing this, and go into their houses to, as they would like go get their checkbook or go get, their money, to pay for that week's newspaper. And it was always like, they were always paying for the week that they had just got. It was like they were paying in arrears. And we would have to pay the newspaper first. So if we would have families that would be weeks in arrears, and that was coming out of our pocket. Do you remember this? And because we would collect it from them, and they would include like tips, and the tips weren't much, but they would include the tips, and then we'd have to pay the newspaper. Whatever was left over we could keep. But if families didn't pay, then it was coming out of our tips. We were covering the cost of that newspaper. No wonder that practice is not that doesn't happen anymore. But anyway, that's what I did, and I did it. We did it for a few years. Then my younger brother took over after a few years, and he did it a little bit longer than that as well. When I was 13, and I started to get really serious about generating income. I was 13, and I knew this babysitting thing was a skill that I had. I was good with babies by then. I was a pro with babies by the time I was 13, and so I had 2 businesses that I worked for as a babysitter. One of them was like a racquetball tennis club. I would work in their daycare, and I would get $1 an hour a kid. So if I had 5 or 6 kids in there, that's $5 or $6 in that hour. And like, I think the most that I would have at any one time would be like 10 kids. But that was huge money back then, because like minimum wage was, when I was that age, I think it was like $1.85 or something was minimum wage. It was pretty low, and this was better than that. And so that was one job, and then the other one was I worked for Hilton Hotels, because I had a relative that worked for Hilton Hotels. I worked for Hilton Hotels as a babysitter that their guests could hire. And I would get paid minimum, maybe minimum wage was $3 at that point. I don't know. Because I kind of remember that it was like a $3 an hour kind of a thing plus tip. I remember it was like really good money. And it was usually not for long periods of time. It was usually like a few hours so parents could go to dinner or something like that. And I think it was under the table still. I think both babysitting gigs were under the table. I don't think it was a tax held kind of a situation, but I don't know. I can't remember that. But I just remember that I did that. And I thought I was the shit because, I was 13 years old and so mature for my age and earning all this money, yada, yada. So I did that for a while. As soon as I turned 16, as soon as I was legally able, I went and got, quote unquote, a real job at McDonald's, as one does, and really enjoyed it. I gotta say, thinking back, with my adult lens and with everything that I've learned about business and everything, the McDonald's model at that time, I don't know if it has changed, but at that time, the structure, just the SOPs and how they do things and how things are handled and how things are organized was so locked down and solid, and like the system was so good. Like you would get certified on each station of work that you did. Like I think I started out on fries, and then I went to I think it was the fish fillet. I know that in the back kitchen, like the actual burgers was like the most advanced station. And I ultimately got to that. And then doing the front register was like the thing of the thing, right? That's what you were striving for at that time. So I really enjoyed that. And did we get free food or discounted food? I remember that I ate a lot of McDonald's, and that part was not good. And I didn't like that when I left at the end of the day, I smelled like McDonald's. Like it just, I didn't like that. But I did that for a while. So 16, I was in high school, and I went from that job immediately to working for Wegmans grocery stores. Gotta love Wegmans. These are the early days of Wegmans, when we used to actually meet the Wegmans brothers as they would come around to the stores. And that was another really, really, really cool place to work. And I worked the front registers, and that was another place where they had like a system, like they would measure your accuracy and your speed every single day, and you would get your stats every single day, and you were competing to be able to work the express lane, because that was the place to be, was the express lane. I don't know why, but it just was. And they would post our stats, so we always knew who was the fastest and like ranking it. And I was so competitive. My problem was I was so competitive to be up there that my efficiency would be off. My cash drawer would be off, because that was like, you literally had to count everything like yourself, at that time. And I was just going too fast or not paying attention or whatever. So my drawer would be off. And I think the third time my drawer was off, I think it was like 3 strikes and you're out. Then I had to start working in one of the other departments. And I went back to deli. I would work for the deli salad bar department. That was also did some work in the bakery. And that was a freaking blast. And so that was all through late high school into college years. So I worked at Wegmans. I went away to college, but I would come back on holidays, when I would come back for Christmas. You guys remember doing this shit? I would come back from Christmas. I'd have like a couple weeks off, and I'd work at the store to earn money on my breaks. And when I would go back to school, I was on the work study program. So I was working on campus when I went back to school. Then when I transferred to the local university, that it cost more money. Like my junior year, I transferred to my local university. It was more money. So I continued to work at Wegmans, but I worked at Wegmans full time to continue out my college. And, and then from leaving college, it was still job after job after job after job, and not stopping and not taking a break and doing whatever it takes. And I mean, I'm thinking of times in my 20s when I was literally working 3-4 jobs. Now, I didn't have 3-4 income streams, like entrepreneurial income streams, because that's not what I was taught. It never even occurred to me to do something like that. My only knowledge of how to make money was to have jobs. And so I would have multiple jobs, and I would have multiple, in some cases, very low paying jobs. So I'd have multiple ones to be able to make ends meet. And I think that this is a very common experience amongst Gen X. Now, what good came out of it? What good came out of it was knowing that you have to contribute, being responsible, taking care of yourself, surviving. But some of the bad that came out of it was not very skilled at relying on others for help or asking for help, and not being skilled at taking a break or knowing when we need to rest, or knowing when there's like more important things in life. So it's interesting how things have ebbed and flowed and changed. And I feel like the pendulum has kind of gone to the extreme in the other area. I would love, 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 love to hear your experience. What was your first job and how old were you? And can you relate to what we're talking about here? I mean, us Gen X women, we are freaking phenomenal. We are bad. You know what? Like we're just extremely resilient. So my name is Amy Palmer. Please remember to like and subscribe to this channel. We talk about all things important to Gen X women. I'm your Gen X Big Sister, signing out.